Good morning. It is 10:24. You're watching and listening to Bev Turner today on GB News. Now, let me introduce you to my panel this morning. I'm pleased to be joined by former Labour MP Stephen Pound. Yeah. Always got a naughty glint in his eye. I have to keep an eye on him as soon as he's in the building. And the author and charity founder, MBE. You've got an MBE, Nick Buckley.
Yes.
Did you get your MBE for your charity work?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. OK, you've got some stories that have caught your eyes this morning, haven't you? We're going to talk about them. Now, Nick, you found a piece in the Mail written by Dominic Lawson. This is about the eco-zealots. What's Dominic saying?
So Dominic is basically saying, instead of getting them on the news channels and talking to them about their tactics, why are you throwing Heinz soup on a Rembrandt? Why are you climbing up the gantry at the M25 and causing this and making a man miss his dad's funeral? Instead of just discussing that, why aren't we challenging them on the lunacy that they're spouting, such as 8 million people are going to die? And you heard the founder from Extinction Rebellion the other day saying, your girlfriend and your mum are going to be raped because of climate change. Why aren't professional journalists going, that's rubbish?
Yeah, well, obviously I would suggest that Dominic Lawson needs to watch a bit more GB News, because I think we have done a pretty good job, actually, of calling them out. Sorry, go on, Stephen.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's two levels here. One is the absolute absurdity. I don't think there's ever been a group of people with a better cause so badly presented. Yeah. And when you've got people like Indigo Rumbelow and Phoebe Plummer, I mean, are they real people? I mean, these are almost, like sort of straw men put up that. But look, the real problem is the government can react to things, as it did when it took lead out of petrol, it brought the Clean Air Act. It can do things. What's happening at the present time is that they are losing the argument, they're losing the case. And you're really seeing more and more cases. Do you remember the ones where they dragged their protesters off the train, off the roof of the train, and they'll be doing more and more of that. So I think everybody agrees that there's an issue with climate change. What nobody agrees with, that I'm aware of, apart from a few sort of self-obsessed, narcissistic, self-publicist virtue signallers, is that gluing yourself to a gantry on the M25 is going to do any good at all, apart from your Instagram profile.
It's the arrogance of it as well, isn't it, Nick? That's what amazes me. I was interviewing somebody last week who was a PhD student who'd taken a year out of his studies. He was zooming in to the show from his student accommodation. Again, it was a Farquhar or a Sebastian or a Tristan, I can't remember. He had a double-barrel surname. Anyway, I know that. So I think what we're getting at when we talk about the class issue, they've got the time and the money, right? They're not working...
It's a gap year, isn't it?
It's a gap year, isn't it? Yes, darling. And they're not working hard in the pub at night so they can pay their student rent. Yeah. They're being bankrolled by mummy and daddy. So what is it then? Is it more about... when I was talking to them, it's about them. It's their issue.
It's pure and simple. It's narcissism. It's, look at me, I'm amazing. I'm just like Gandhi. I'm just like Mandela. This is what they would be fighting if they were alive today. I'm just like Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm saving the world. And if you believe you're saving the world, that must feel great. It also then gives you an excuse to do whatever you want because you're saving the world.
It's Greta Thunberg envy, really. But the awful thing is that why don't they get involved in politics? We're a democracy in this country. I mean, we may disagree about the level of it, but everybody can get involved in politics, not necessarily as an MP or as a councillor, but your MPs and your councillors are available to you. Change the government to change the law to make things better. Now, I understand the argument about China and coal and everything like that, but you've got to actually act locally and think globally, and we can do something, but hanging off the M25 ain't the way to do it.
But that's hard work. Turning up
silly me.
meetings twice a week, crawling up that political ladder, much easier to, like you say, scale a gantry and put a video on Instagram, and then you're suddenly on TV stations.
A wet Tuesday night in the church hall at the MP surgery, you make a persuasive case for gantry hanging.
But I mean, look, like you say, maybe they have a point. Maybe there is a climate condition, a situation we have to deal with. I don't think it necessarily qualifies as an emergency.
I don't think there is.
You don't think
I don't think there is.
I think the science is still up for debate. And I guess that's what Dominic Lawson's point is. In these interviews, these interviewees, what they are saying is being accepted as fact. And I feel like we haven't had that discussion.
They're saying it as if it is fact. They're saying, have you read the ICCP report, whatever it is? Because, and then they come out with a load of rubbish, and because no one else has read that report, it's like, oh, that must be true. Yeah. But It's not in those reports. It's just made up hysteria.
Well, they've got us talking and generally talking about the fact that there are a bunch of idiots.
But
so
it's a hell of... If there is no climate change,
talking
it's a hell
of
of a
idiots,
coincidence.
Stephen, I just want to move on. I know you wanted to discuss with us this morning Matt Hancock in I'm a Celebrity. Was this your idea? I said you always bring me problems when you come into this building. Look, it does raise a serious issue, doesn't it, about whether MPs should be allowed to do this kind of thing.
Well, I mean, years and years ago, there used to be a programme called At the Sharp End. And the idea is it took MPs, honest, decent, hard-working, civilised MPs, and put them in an environment in which they were not familiar, and just to see how they reacted. And they were filming us. And I was sent to Dartmoor Prison.
And you were doing that?
Oh, yeah, I spent a fortnight in Dartmoor Prison.
Wow.
With a guy called Gerald Howarth. And you know, we were prison officers, not prisoners.
Yeah.
But what I found very, very quickly was that you tended to act up for it. You tended to ham up for it. When the chief prison officer practiced what's called evasion technique, in case you got taken hostage, he broke 2 of my ribs. And then when I got back to Parliament, I went across to St Thomas's Hospital and I said, "Excuse me, I think I've got some broken ribs." And they said, "Yep, you have. How did you get it?" I said, "Well, I was in Dartmoor." I said, "Do they know you're out?" I said, "No, it's all right, I'm an MP." And I could see in the mirror, psychiatric registrar to A&E now. But the thing was, you act up for it. With Matt Hancock, I think Matt Hancock, as he said, he wants to put hay in the loft. He's going to get $500,000 for this.
He wants forgiveness.
Yeah.
That was the interesting thing for me, Nick, was that he said he wants forgiveness from the nation. It's not going to come that easily, is it?
First of all, I've not watched it. I don't watch it, never have watched it, never will watch it. It's just rubbish TV. But I have read about it. Should we stop politicians doing what they want to do? No, we shouldn't. He's a politician. If he wants to go on to that, he can go on to that. Then gives us the right to look at him and look at his character and go, he is not the sort of politician we want. I think he's just trying to rebuild his career because he's hated quite heavily throughout the country because of the lockdown and then what happened there. And is he looking for forgiveness or is he looking for a new career pathway? Or is he looking for a big payday because he knows it's all over for him?
I think all of the above.
Yeah.
I think all of the above. And, you know, I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it, Stephen? Because, as we say, we don't want to put too many restrictions on what politicians can do. To some extent, we want politicians to be existing in the real world. We want them to have a good backstory of possibly working in different environments and dealing with different people, and so that they bring that wealth of experience to their job. We don't want necessarily career politicians who come straight out of Oxford and Cambridge at 21 and go to Westminster.
I entirely agree, but I mean, I'm not entirely sure that the real world consists of people eating a kangaroo's private parts in a bit of the jungle.
Not often enough, one might say.
Yeah.
But maybe in that case, when you are elected as a politician, maybe you should be paid more so that you aren't tempted to go and top up the divorce coffers via this means.
I have to say, offering politicians money so that they don't have to earn more money is a no. It's not going to happen. It simply isn't going to happen. But I think what we need, maybe look at term limits for MPs, so that maybe you don't take the job forever.
Yeah.
And maybe, I mean, I went into Parliament when I was 49 years old. I did 22 years in that. But, you know, I'd been a hospital porter, I'd been a bus driver, I'd done things beforehand. And I'm not saying that's brilliant, but compared to nowadays, where you tend to go to Oxford or Cambridge, and then you go to America, whatever, come in, it's nonsense. But the question is, and I think following up from what Nick said, what does Matt Hancock want? I think he's not going to be an MP at the next election. He's going to get deselected in something.
Yeah. He's
got a huge amount of money. He's got young children, don't forget. You know, and the Gina Coladangelo business is going to, you know, obviously there's a divorce. He'll have to pay for that. So he's going to lose a lot of that 400,000. So
you know what he likes?
Where does he go?
When you watch the programme, and I've watched bits of it, but obviously I watch Dan Wootton at 9 o'clock during the week. I don't watch that as much.
Don't we all?
But I've watched bits of it on Fast Forward because I have to talk about it on the telly. Do you know what he wants? He wants to be liked. That's the most chilling thing. He wants to be liked. Being liked by the campmates is so important to him. And I think it tells you a lot about maybe where his Achilles heel
because he's a
lies
professional
as an
politician.
MP, because he's a professional politician.
It hasn't worked with Mike Tyndall, has it?
Thanks, guys. You're going to be back in just a moment. But after the break, it is 6 days before the World Cup kicks off. What? It's not summer. I know it's a bit of a weird time of the year. So to preview the tournament and go through the home nation's chances, I'm going to be joined by sports journalist Harry Harris. That's after your morning news with Rosie. I'm going to bring my panellists in now. Nick Buckley is still here, and Stephen Pound. Football fan, Nick, will it be overshadowed for you by the politics, the corruption, the number of people who lost their lives building the stadiums?
Yeah. Over 6,000 people died building the stadiums. There's 2 points on the World Cup in Qatar. The first thing is football now is all about money. It's not about the game, it's about money. Teams are sold now like playing cards when I was a child. It's about the money. And we're playing the World Cup in Qatar because certain people made a load of backhand money of getting it to Qatar. Is it the right place to go? I don't know. Is the weather going to affect it? Do you know what? People play football all over the world, so I don't know. My main point is the hypocrisy, especially of the England team. They've spent 2 years on their knee shouting Black Lives Matter, rainbow laces, and now they're going to a country where homosexuality is illegal and you can have the death penalty for it, where 6,000 slaves died building the stadiums, where it's almost like a caste system there with the Q80s and everybody else is an underclass. And they're going to go and play football there after lecturing us for 2 years. If you just look at Gary Neville got humiliated on Have I Got News for You over this, it's the hypocrisy. And they don't see it, or more likely, they don't care because of the money they're going to earn.
Stephen, that is a very bleak analysis of football, of humanity, of character Nick's just given us there. Do you think that's what's going on here?
I find it very difficult to disagree with Nick.
Yeah.
This is a corruption cup. It's going to be a bit like, the Olympics in 1939. The politics around it, because it's obviously held in Nazi Germany, and not making a direct comparison, but the politics are going to overshadow the football. And I'm disappointed in David Beckham, really disappointed that he's become a cheerleader for this. It's not like he's short of a few bob. But, there will still be great games. I mean, look at the Brazilian side. They're just one of the most fantastic sides in the world. And look at, Mitrovic for Serbia. There's some great players out there apart from the ones that were mentioned, but it will be overshadowed by that. We still don't know from the embassies of Nepal and Bangladesh and the Philippines what's happened to their citizens who've died there. It's horrific. I have to say, it's a bit like the Kerry Packer tours. You remember when they went to apartheid South Africa?
Yeah.
And you just think, people simply shouldn't do that. I know politics and sport is not supposed to mix, but it does. Politics and sport are integral, just as much money is. I think it's an embarrassment, it's nasty. And as for playing football in the winter, I love playing football in the winter. It's glorious, especially when the pitch is a bit wet. You can come in on a sliding tackle and nobody can actually blow up the whistle for you. It's the idea that we're simply going out there because we want a bit of sunshine is rubbish.
Now, talking of corruption, I can't have a former politician here without mentioning the fact that possibly your industry hasn't managed to swerve that particular allegation over the years.
Yeah.
How bad do you think it is now in 2022? I mean, we saw issues over PPE contracts during the pandemic. We, the public, very much got the sense that there were backhanders left, right and centre, contracts being handed out to friends. Yeah. Is it as bad as it ever was, Stephen? Is it worse?
In 2010, David Cameron said the next big scandal is going to be lobbying. I mean, that is the scandal at the moment. Now, the thing, I can kind of sort of slightly nuance the PPE thing. I mean, OK, you meet a bloke in a pub and he says he can run them up for you. Compared to the amount of fraud with the business world, with the support money, it's just massive, it's eye-watering. However, corruption does exist, but it's not just financial corruption. It's not just the fivers in a Tesco bag. It's also the influence, it's the promises of something. It's the favours that are given. Nobody ever gives you anything for nothing in politics. And I think the great thing you have to learn is that there's always a hook inside the cake. But it is bad. However, people like yourself and people like GB News are exposing it now. The great thing, a lot of nasty things happened in the darkness. There was corruption in the shadows, really bad stuff. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and media sunlight is the best thing. That's the hope for us. Actually, root out the corrupt ones by shining the light of torch of light on them. Do
you think there still should be more light shone on issues that happened during the pandemic? I mean, Matt Hancock, a High Court judge did say at the time, didn't he, that the Secretary of State for Health, Matt Hancock, failed to comply with the public procurement law that required the government to publish contract awards within 30 days. That seemed to it was dealt with officially, but you couldn't help feeling for the public. We felt like it was sort of brushed to one side. We're in a pandemic. The normal rules don't apply, right? We're all under pressure. We're making these decisions. Oh, sorry, it's not us. I still think there needs to be a lot of answers for this, don't you, Nick?
Look at test and trace. I mean, how many
Test and trace. 32 billion.
I know. And for what? And that was ludicrous. But on the other hand, a
piece of tech that didn't work.
The vaccine rollout did work. Yeah. So there was one of a few things. But test and trace is a huge scandal. And we still haven't come to the bottom of that.
What do we do about it, Nick?
We need a full inquiry into all this, that everything over the 2 years of the pandemic, for several reasons. First, to find out what worked. In case it ever happens again, we need to know what worked. And just as importantly, we need to know what doesn't work so future governments don't make them same mistakes. And it needs to be all out in the public. And I think we're all quite willing to give certain people the benefit of the doubt at the beginning of the pandemic because nobody knew what was going on. Let's make some big decisions. When, you know, everyone can make mistakes. But we need to know how long those mistakes went on for and how much of this was just covering our back.
Well, the COVID inquiry is going on at the moment, but I'm not optimistic, and several people I've interviewed about it are not optimistic that the terms of reference are even appropriate as that begins. Right, OK, NHS. The Mirror today, last chance to save our NHS. Now, if that isn't a headline that I've seen on the front page of the paper...
last chance?
This is it, this is it.
No, this is the last
Oh,
chance.
this is the last chance.
Okay,
no, it's the last one.
This headline, I'd love somebody to do how many times this has actually run in newspapers in the last 50 years, I would say. Is it, Stephen?
Well,
is it now genuinely on its last legs?
Yeah. Well, I was born on the same day as the NHS back in July 1948, you know, and I'm, you know, fairly healthy, you know, as are my 9 brothers and sisters, you know, who were all born on that time. But the reality is, 2 years after the NHS was formed in July 48, there was a thing called the Gillibo Report, which actually said, you know, you can no longer have spectacles and dentistry on the NHS. It's financially unsustainable. The NHS, as originally structured by Beveridge, relied on a couple of things. Men leaving school at 15, retiring at 65 and dying at 75, and women not working. So the women would stay at home, look after the elderly and the infirm. So the financial basis of the NHS was flawed from the kick-off.
Yeah.
The ideology, brilliant, marvellous idea. But we're now spending, what, 83 billion a year. I would have thought...
And rising.
If there's one area of public life where we can actually say this is a cross-party issue, why can't we all come together and talk about continuing care and the NHS and just say, look, at the moment it is cursed by political antipathy and short-termism. Nobody would attack... The only independent MP I can think of in my time in Parliament was elected for the Save Kidderminster Hospital campaign. You know, and in Ireland, there are 5 TDs elected on the Save Hospital campaign. So it's what we call the third rail in politics. You don't touch it.
But you see, people have a very special place in their heart for the National Health Service, don't they? And that's why it's become political, because it's a vote winner. And people will look for the party who is going to save the NHS that I need, that my children might need, that my parents need. And that is who I'm going to vote for. But it's changing, Nick. I feel like something that is very fundamental in the air at the moment. To all intents and purposes, it isn't working, and there is a privatisation going on beneath our very noses.
And there has been since Tony Blair. I think the pandemic has damaged the reputation of the NHS because we closed the whole country down to save the institution that should have been saving us during the pandemic. It was crazy what we did. Half my family work in the NHS. Nurses, midwives work in A&E, the Children's Hospital, Dental Hospital. Literally half my family work there. And by the way, not one of them has ever gone to a food bank. So this thing about the food bank's a load of rubbish. The first thing we need to do with the NHS, because you're right, it's very political and everybody loves it because it saves people's lives. The first thing we need to do is have a national conversation about what is the NHS for? Because at the moment, the NHS does everything for everybody, regardless of what you need, what you want. And what gets invented tomorrow, we're going to do all that as well. We need to have a discussion because just off the top of my head, I would stop all IVF.
Harsh, Nick Buckley.
I'd stop all IVF. My grandchild is an IVF baby. I love her dearly, but I would stop all IVF on the NHS because it's not what it was for. I have friends who are semi-professional footballers who are at doctors and hospitals almost every month with their knees, their ankles, having them all fixed. You need private insurance, mate, because you're a semi-professional footballer. Breast enlargements, nose jobs, there's things which the NHS shouldn't be doing.
Well, that raises the issue then, if it's about a value judgment, should the NHS be treating people who smoke? Should the NHS be treating people who drink too much or eat too much? There's nobody left. You're going to have empty receptions if we discount anybody that does anything that might at any point damage their health, surely.
I think there's a slight difference there. I wouldn't stop people who smoked or people who are obese because then you're making value judgments.
But you're making a value judgment if you say you might want bigger boobs, but you shouldn't have them on the NHS.
Because that's not health-related.
But they would say it's their mental health-related.
Everything's mental health-related. So there's a debate. Hence why we need a public debate. I'm not saying what I say is right. I'm just saying they're my opinions.
Let's talk about it,
Let's talk about it and let's find what the general public want the NHS to deliver. And then let's work out how much that's going to cost. And then we need to be honest with people. And we need to say, this is what we can have, but it's going to cost you 15% of your wage every month just to fund the NHS. And we're going to have the same discussion a decade from now.
It's wasteful, though, isn't it, Stephen?
Yeah.
That's what I think. Any interactions I have with the NHS, I cannot get over. Even what I see with my own eyes, and I'm there as a patient or the mother of a patient, the waste that goes on.
I'm sorry, at the moment, the internal market is a disaster. The idea that you've got individual hospitals, individual trusts bidding against each other, is a whole layer, a stultifying, sludge-laden layer of bureaucracy on top of it. But the extraordinary thing is, if you read Beveridge, you read the report, don't forget, he wrote this in the middle of the war.
Yeah.
It's incredible. What he said was, the NHS, as I envisage it, will only need to be around for 10 to 15 years. Then, because improved public health will actually reduce the amount of hospital admissions, it'll taper away. But of course, the problem is we now have an elastic demand and an inelastic supply. People want more and more and more. I think, and I'm not going to agree too much with you for obvious reasons, but on this occasion, absolutely right. Why can't we have a speakers' conference and to actually get together and just say, look, this is so big, this is actually fundamental. But people, you're right, Bev. I mean, maybe we're not a very religious nation anymore because we have the NHS as our sort of state religion.
Yeah.
We've got to start being objective about it. I mean, my wife's a nurse, my sister's a nurse. I worked in the Middlesex Hospital for years. I've got a huge affection for it. But I hope I can be objective, because the idea you deify a structure or an organisation, you're not doing it a favour, and you're not doing yourself a favour, and you're not doing the country a favour.
Nick Buckley, Stephen Pound, thank you so much. You're not going anywhere, are you, at the moment? I mean, it's a neighbours in dispute. A pensioner 72 faces a £30,000 court bill after blocking the shared drive with pot plants during a 10-year war with their next-door neighbour. These are in the paper quite frequently, Stephen. I find it hard to imagine how you could fight so much with your neighbour that it goes on for 10 years and you end up paying £30,000 in court fees in the end.
Well, it starts off as pot plants in a shared driveway. It ends up with sort of mutual loathing and refusal to back down. I mean, I took a piece of legislation called the High Hedges Bill through the Parliament because people used to grow Cypressus leylandii, and the next-door neighbours would be like darkness at noon, you're constantly being overshadowed. And people died. There was actually 2 cases where people were killed in disputes over, the high hedges and these Cypressus leylandii. But this one, it says something about the pathology of, not just the pathology, the personality of the individuals involved. Who on earth's got £30,000 to spend arguing with their neighbours? Just move if necessary. But pot plants on the driveway. The key thing here is the shared parking. And as I was a suburban MP for many, many years, the one thing that really excited my constituents, the one thing that really got the juices flowing was a parking space.
Yes, and a dropped curb and to do
luxury.
So. But you know what, Toby? I think over the last couple of years, I mean, these stories are, perennial, aren't they? They're often coming back, people falling out with their neighbours. They're stories of stubbornness and refusal to back down. But something happened very kind of pernicious with our relationship with our neighbours in the last couple of years, didn't it? That suddenly we feel we have a right to impose our views on our neighbours.
Yeah, well, I don't think it helped that people were encouraged to dob in their neighbours if they weren't complying with the lockdown policy or COVID restrictions. That encouraged a kind of Stasi-like side of the British character that normally is kind of suppressed to come out, and we haven't quite put it back in its box yet. We need to work a bit harder on that.
It's surprising, actually, we said, because it clearly was always there, Nick, wasn't it, this side of the British character, that we do want to dob somebody in. We just never had the reason to do so, and suddenly the government handed us a massive stick to beat our neighbours with.
It's human nature. Humans are the same all over the world. We're the same as the East Germans were in the 70s and 80s. It's just that our culture and our government was slightly different. But if we're given the same circumstances, we will act just like East Germans, just like Rwandans during the genocide, just like Nazi Germany. It's in all of us. And that's what we need to be aware of and careful of.
Oof, chilling. That's a bit deep for a Monday morning, isn't it? I'm a bit terrified now. Right, Toby, let's talk about Stonewall, something you feel very strongly about. What have they been up to?
Yeah, well, at the Free Speech Union, we quite often get contacted pretty much every week by people who get into trouble in their workplace because they refuse to declare their preferred gender pronouns. Often they're gender-critical feminists who don't believe that, sex is something you can just choose at will. It's binary and immutable. You can't alter your birth sex. So they don't want to have to choose their pronouns because that is conceding too much to the idea that actually sex is a choice. It's a social construct, just like gender. And they dispute that. They don't like that idea. And it seems like Stonewall is one of the organisations that's been responsible for seeding this idea across workplaces, particularly in the public sector. companies, departments that want to be Stonewall diversity champions, get a gold star from the organisation, will have a policy in the workplace whereby you have to declare your gender pronouns, and that upsets a lot of people.
Is this all under the banner of this environmental social governance? Like, is that where this sits?
I think it sits more under DIE, diversity, inclusion and equity, or DIE for short. But the interesting thing about this story is that Stonewall have gone one further. They're always going one further. And in this case, they're encouraging workplaces who want to earn the gold star to give employees the option of having 2 email addresses.
Oh,
so if they want to switch genders, they can just change their email addresses. If they change their first names, that's not going to cause any confusion, is it?
No. So you could have, like, Mrs. Toby Young at toby.co.uk or Mr. Toby Young, depending on
which side of the bed I get up on in the morning.
Are you serious?
No, they're encouraging workplaces to do this, to make them more trans inclusive. And God knows what it's going to cost the taxpayer.
Same with ID
public
passes.
departments.
You'll be given 2 ID passes, one with your male name, one with your female name, in case you change during the day.
I mean, I quite like the idea of anything that will get me through an ID system, to be honest. I'll choose it. But, Nick, the world's gone a bit mad, hasn't it? Is that what this story is about? That surely an employer has to take the lead on this and say, no, enough of this. I'm not going to pander to it.
There's 2 lines you can go down on this, and I always go down that humans are greedy and want money. So you can either look at it and say they believe all this, Stonewall, and they're fighting for not gender equality, but gender identity and on all this craziness. Or in 2014, when gay marriage was made legal, and that should have been the end of Stonewall. They achieved everything they ever said they wanted to achieve. But rather than closing down, they decided to add a T in a Q and start fighting for lots of other stuff.
And a plus.
And a plus, because they wanted to keep their wonderful pensions. They wanted to keep their wonderful high-paid jobs. So they created new problems to keep on fighting. And I believe that's what this is.
Right.
This is a charity that doesn't want to close because it's achieved everything it wanted to achieve, and now it's about my pension.
But isn't it interesting, if you actually look at the midterms in America, there's a huge debate going on within the Democratic Party at the present time, where they're saying sort of mainstream Democrats, not AOC and the other people like that. They're people who are actually concentrating on bread and butter issues, law and order, the issues that actually matter to people, rather than gender-critical pronouns. They're the ones who did very, very well. And I think in many cases in these, we do follow America, sadly. And I think the debate that's taking place in the Democratic Party, obviously nothing compared with what's happening within the Republicans, but let's not intrude on somebody else's grief. But I think that will impact on us. I think your point is right. Stonewall was created because of the Stonewall riots. If you remember when the police raided this club in New York, we've now moved on from that. I mean, the leader of Stonewall's in the House of Lords, for heaven's sake.
Thank you, Nikki. Keep up the amazing work, won't you? Thank you so much for telling us all about it on GB News this morning. Nikki Scott there, founder of Scotty's Little Soldiers, a charity dedicated to supporting bereaved British Forces children and young people. Nick, I want to bring you in. You lost your dad when you were very young, didn't you?
Yeah, 6.
Yeah, what happened?
So my dad died in a car crash on Halloween. Halloween evening, which is quite spooky. I mean, it's a great charity that we've just heard about there. All I would say is children are more resilient than we give them credit for. I'm not saying it's easy. It's not easy, but, children can get over these things and do get over these things and need help and support and need charities like that. What we don't think about is children who do worse, their fathers are normally alive. So missing out on a father and not having a father in your life, when you know he's alive, damages children more than losing your father in an accident or armed forces.
Because you've got that sense of rejection that your father is alive and he's not involved in your life. Stephen, it's a very, we talk about Prince Harry a lot, and obviously his wife drives most of us up the wall, right? We don't always agree with what she's been doing. We don't like the way that she's thrown the royal family under the bus and criticised them. I think it's easy to forget with Harry that he went through this personality-changing trauma as a child, and maybe we should let him off the hook a bit.
I think we have to cut him some slack.
I think so.
He's been there. He's actually been there in Helmand. In a place that I don't think any of us would actually willingly go there. He's actually been there. But look, my wife was born in an RAF base in Warrington, and I know a little bit about these service families. But if I may just say one very important thing. The Royal British Legion exists to help not just service personnel, but their families as well. And I'm the president of the Greenford branch of the Legion. One of our members, Chris Casey, who was killed in Iraq, his family are invited on Remembrance Sunday to actually stand there with the dignitaries doing the presentation, and we will welcome and this is, you know, the parents of the slain, their children, anybody who's in that family. The Royal British Legion is there to help them. It's not just for serving military personnel. And I'm sorry to underline that, but I wish people mustn't suffer in silence. The Legion exists to provide another level of family support. Please, please get in touch with us.
Yeah. Toby, it is the Monday after Remembrance Weekend. We're talking about Prince Harry and the children there that have lost parents in the services. How do you think our relationship in the UK is to our military at the moment? It's time to reflect on it on a weekend like this, on Remembrance Weekend, isn't it? What were your thoughts yesterday?
Yeah, I think we often imagine that we are a nation full of self-loathing, self-doubt, that when we think of our armed forces, we think of colonialism and the empire and not something to be proud of. That's the kind of story often told, and often told in schools as well to children. But actually, on things like Remembrance Sunday, you realise that, you know, beneath that superficial veneer, that spin, there's a huge amount of patriotism and still a huge amount of self-belief and pride in this country. So it's really great to be reminded of.
Yeah, it is. Suella Braverman over there signing this deal. Is it going to make any difference, do you think?
It's hard to imagine it's going to make a big impact because all they're going to be doing, as I'm sure the panellists pointed out, is interrupting people's efforts to cross the channel.
Yeah.
They'll be delaying their crossing, but I don't think they're going to stop it permanently.
No.
And, you know, if you look at the numbers who came over this year, I mean, it's a big increase on the numbers who came over last year. It's just a kind of metaphor for the impotence of our government, the hopelessness of our politicians and officials, their inability to do something about this problem, which has beset this country for God knows how many years now. And it just seems it's just a kind of constant reminder of our powerlessness in the face of, you know, an enduring problem.
Yeah. Nick, I was mentioning at the top of the hour, if you want to watch the whole show today, by the way, you can find it on the GB News app, about the fact that Albania are desperate to join the EU. They want investment. They have some fantastic natural resources, the coastlines, the national parks. They just have, well, they have a corrupt government. Maybe they'd fit in well in the EU. Am I allowed to say that? But actually, maybe that is part of the reason. Maybe Europe should be sweeping them up and helping that country so that 40% of the population will no longer be leaving. 85% at the moment want to leave Albania. What do we do?
It's up to the people in that country to sort the problems out themselves. The West does not have a good record of going into other countries to fix their problems. We tend to make things worse. And what we do in the West is we allow usually young men who should be the backbone of a country, who should be building it and fixing it, we allow them to take the coward's way and run away from their responsibility and set life up somewhere else. And I'm calling them out. It's a cowardly way to go.
Yeah.